I wanted just to share with you some of the things that's happened to me. It'll take me about a minute. That's how important it is. I moved down to Florida about 15 years ago from Connecticut. I got sober in Manhattan, very, very comfortable with my sobriety. I knew just about everybody in town because everybody in town was a drunk and we all went to the same meetings. And we were comfortable. When I came to Florida, I couldn't transfer that same feeling because that was home and I knew everyone. And I sort of I went to meetings and didn't share and sort of withdrew. So by the time I met Jim, which was about a year ago, I had withdrawn from meetings, stopped going to meetings, took control of my life, and like, okay, God, I got it. I'm not getting it anyway. And lost my business, got marital problems, bankrupt. You can't believe the number of things that I did to myself while in control. Now, Jim has a name for that. He says, you stayed sober just for the grace of God. And a lot of people would say, well, that's a dry drunk. Well, be it whatever. I was in such bad shape 1 year ago that I said, the only thing left for me is either to drink or rededicate myself to the program. So believe me, I came crawling back in on my hands and knees. And it wasn't maybe the third night or fourth night I've been going to 2 meetings a day. I went to the Boca Pines group and sat next to this guy. Now, he wasn't controlling that meeting. He was just listening. But for some reason, Jim got to me that night. And I've become sort of a Jim groupie. I only go where Jim goes. He's opened the doors for me. He's unlocked things that I had never seen before. I've actually reread the big book again and again. And you know, as you go through it with Jim, it's just I hear something new. Not once, but 2 or 3 times a night. Yeah. And it has a different meaning to it. And when I see so many people come in and not make the program and they slip, and I've got sons and they've all got problems, and some do sometimes. But I've seen it up close what I can do, and I know what the recovery is. And I get angry at myself a lot of times for listening to the pure bullshit out there about don't drink and go to meetings. Jim says it quite adeptly. How can you not drink and go to meetings when that's your problem? You got to be told how to get sober. You got to be told to read that big book, not just part of it, but all of it, and to do the steps. And some of us are just a little more stubborn than others, but I'll tell you this, I'm up here 30 years tonight, which I'm very, very grateful to the people in these rooms, to this man here, and my dearly God. Thank you very much.
Now let's start out with the basic concept of the steps. That the person walking in the door is in a state of rebellion, defiance, denial, is in a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, has been beaten and whipped and smashed to a point where hopefully as they walk in the door they really, really, really want help. And they realize that this is the last house on the block. Now, not everybody coming in the door understands that, but usually they're close to that at the very least. And so the first thing they want to know is, who can I trust? I've been told by everybody I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm stupid, I have no willpower, I'm selfish, I don't know, I'm hurting other people, what's the matter with me? I've been beaten around from pillar to post. I've been stuck away in treatment centers and detoxes and prisons. I've been laughed at, I've been ridiculed. I've been made to feel lower than whale excretion on the bottom of the ocean. And yet, nobody has yet said anything to me that would be helpful, except, get your act together. What's the matter with you? Haven't you got any willpower? You don't have to drink look what you're doing to your family. Look what you're doing to yourself. On, and then the preachers get after us. If you'll only do this, or if you'll only go there, if you'll get to the altar, all the stuff that they have, then you'll be okay. And we tried that, and that didn't work either. And the psychiatrists tell us, oh, okay, all you got to know is why you drank. I'm going to take you apart and put you back together again, and you're going to learn all about yourself. You're going to get all the self-knowledge. In the process, I'm going to scare you to death about what happens to you if you drink. And therefore, you will stop drinking. And they tried that, and it didn't work. We thought we were going to be all well. And then there was these other doctors that came along and said, what's the matter with you is that you are bipolar. Or you got dual addiction, or maybe they said you're paranoid schizophrenic, or whatever the hell they said. Now here's a bunch of pills, take this whole cocktail of pills, and you'll be just fine. What's the real problem? See, the human solutions don't understand what's wrong with us. The first step recognizes what is wrong with us. It isn't the booze. Alcohol is a symptom. If we weren't abusing alcohol, we'd certainly be doing something else. The real problem is that we are powerless and that we are spiritually bankrupt. And we are powerless precisely because we have been living our lives as if we were God, thinking we had power, trying to get power, but never achieving it because it was never there for us. The big book says that our dilemma was lack of power. And in order for us to recover, we had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, and that's what this book's all about, and that's what the steps are all about. What do you suppose it means to go from a place of rebellion and defiance to a place of surrender and obedience and a spiritual awakening? It means simply what we hear every day when we read the three pertinent ideas. That God can and will if we seek Him. The whole thing revolves around this, seeking God. And in the process, we are relieved of the obsession and compulsion to drink. And as we work the steps, we change our lives. We change our lives. So the first step then addresses this problem. What is the problem? If we're a real alcoholic, it means that we have a physical infirmity of some kind, which Dr. Silkworth identifies as analogous to an allergy. And in that infirmity means that whenever we put alcohol into our system, in any amounts at all, that we're going to activate what he calls the phenomenon of craving. Just as an allergy would activate hives or runny nose or whatever, with us, alcohol activates this overwhelming craving to drink, which we have no power to fight with. The other side of the coin is that as an alcoholic, we have a twist in our brains. The fact of the matter is that every alcoholic coming in the door is, to some extent, insane. Our brains don't work right. And the reason they do not work right is because our natural God-given instincts have been warped and perverted by fear. And so we no longer react or think normally and rationally. Now, the first step, recognizing that these things are true, and it's based upon this. Here it is. And this is, if you take your sponsees and you go back to basics every time. We're alcoholics. This means that we have a disease which is incurable, invariably fatal, and progressive. And it means, therefore, that if we do not stop drinking, we will die. We may go crazy first, but sooner or later we will die. And the only solution there is to stop drinking. The problem with that is that we can't stop drinking. So on the one hand, if we don't stop, we die. And on the other hand, we can't stop. Now here's a brand new person, and you present them with this dilemma. If you don't stop drinking, you die, but unfortunately you can't stop on your own. That's what it means to be powerless. When you look at the first step, where we admit our powerlessness over alcohol, that's what it means. that we cannot stop drinking on our own. And if we do not stop, we will die. Now that presents a dilemma, and so the first step then is designed for us to fully recognize this dilemma. It doesn't have anything to do really with unmanageability of life. The fact is that every alcoholic walking in the door has an unmanageable life. So what? If you go out in the world, you're going to find 99.9% of the people out there can't manage their own lives. That doesn't mean they're alcoholics. First step is designed this way, and it's all in one little paragraph, 4 lines. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently may be, has to be smashed. Now, how do we get this? It can't be pounded into our heads. 450 questions being answered isn't going to do it for us. It's going to come very simply. How do we... You see, every step requires effort. Every step requires work. Let me tell you how you work the first step. First thing you do is you read the big book. We're going to get to a meeting every day, at least once. We're going to make a commitment to do that. We're going to talk to people who have solid recovery. We're going to consult with them. We're going to mingle with them when we can. We're going to ask them questions. And most important of all, we're going to start to pray. Now this prayer can be to whom it may concern, or God if you're there. If you're a sponsor, you write out a little prayer. Very simple. God, if you're there, I'm not sure about you, but if you are there, please help me to stay free of alcohol for today. Any kind of a prayer will do, because we must start immediately to pave the way toward a prayerful life and a spiritual awakening. If you go to Dr. Silkworth's opinion, I'll just tell you this right now, the last word in Dr. Silkworth's opinion is pray. Because he saw that it was prayer that was doing it for the people in his hospital that he'd given up on, that he could not help. When we do that, read the big book, go to meetings, talk to people in recovery, and pray, what happens is, it happens every time, nobody's immune to this, we are given a great gift, which cannot be forced upon us, but it'll just come. We will learn that we must concede to our innermost selves that we are alcoholics, and we will accept as a fact that we can never safely drink alcohol again the rest of our lives. That's the firm foundation under all the rest of the 12 steps. You see, without that, nothing else is going to work. This has got to happen first. The real question is, how do I keep from taking the first drink? If I'm determined to do that, my sponsor tells me, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to work the rest of the steps, and in the process, you will be relieved of the obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol. The problem will be removed. It will not exist for you anymore. Now, the first step having been taken, let's take a look at the second step. The second step requires of us that we reach a belief. Only a belief. That's all it is. And yet it's a major leap, because for some of us, because we may be coming from a place of absolutely stagnant religious or spiritual beliefs. Maybe we are actively agnostic or actively atheistic. Most people are not. Most people may talk about it, but they're really afraid of God. Remember that as a sponsor, please, because they know they've done a lot of things. They're afraid of being punished and so forth. They don't want it having to do with God because they're afraid of what He's going to do to them. And we have to find a way to get past that. Now, the big book is going to show us the way, and it starts out with these two propositions. First, that the requirement here is that you be willing to adopt your own conception of God, whatever that may be. It doesn't have to be anything profound at all. It may be It may be that your conception of God is in the trees and the forest and the animals and nature. It may be your conception of God is something totally off the wall that nobody else ever thought of. It doesn't matter. Because what we're doing here is we're addressing ourselves to a power greater than ourselves. So we need to be willing to choose a higher power of our own understanding, whatever that may be. And the other requirement is that we must be willing to accept the proposition that there just might be a higher power, a God out there. A willingness to accept the concept or the existence of a higher power. That's all it takes. Those two things. So we're going to ask for a willingness to believe, and we're going to adopt our own conception of God. And then the big book in chapter 4 gives us much material, the chapter 2 agnostics. It also, in chapter 3, gives us the answers to this question. We're asked to come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. Well, now, it may well be that we have a whole lot of difficulty in accepting the fact that we're nuts, that we are, in fact, insane. Well, the big book answers that. In the last half of the 3rd chapter, gives us the stories of Jim and Fred and the jaywalker, which clearly illustrate the insanity of taking that first drink, in spite of knowing what's bound to happen. We've got such tremendous background and all. We know what's going to happen, but we do it anyway. We know that if we don't stop, we're going to die, but we do it anyway. And we've made 1,000 commitments not to drink, and yet we can't stop ourselves. And so the big book examines this question of insanity, and it also examines this question of the agnostic and the existence of God. I should tell you that the first 3 steps are gifts. They cannot be forced on anybody. I can't make, and you can't make, anybody you sponsor or anybody you're interested in. You can't make them believe. But the belief will come. If they're doing the work, it will come, guaranteed. Now, in the big book, we have on page 53, we've got a little paragraph, which is the 2nd step. It's very simple. It says, we have reached a self-imposed crisis. And in this self-imposed crisis, we've had to come to an understanding that God either is or he is not. God either is everything or he's nothing. Now the question is very simple. Do you believe that God is? A God of your understanding. No definition needed. Not the God of AA, a God of your understanding. Do you believe that that God exists? If the answer is yes, the next question is, do you believe that God is everything, or do you believe that God is nothing? Because you can't have it both ways. God either is or he's not. God's either everything or he's nothing. If the answer is God is and God is everything, then it's simple, isn't it? Because the next question you ask is this. If God is and God is everything, do you have any doubt that he can or has the power to restore you to sanity? And the answer to that has got to be yes. Logically, it must be yes, mustn't it? And so there's the 2nd step. It's that simple. Now the 3rd step begins in the 4th chapter, where in the end of the 4th chapter there's a segue into the 3rd step, because the big book begins to talk in these terms. For example, it tells us that there's going to have to be a willingness to make leaps of faith. It tells us that the bridge of reason will only carry us so far, that there's a new land of faith out here, and the people are standing there waiting for us, and we want to go to the new land. But the bridge of reason doesn't extend to the new land of faith, the only answer being that we must be willing to take a leap of faith, and when we do that, there are friendly hands there to catch us. And we will find that we have reached the new land, and we have reached the land of faith. And then when we get into chapter 5, we're going to find much further discussion of the 3rd step. And remember, the 3rd step is a decision. So we have conceded our alcoholism. We have come to believe that God can restore us to sanity. And now we're going to make a decision to turn our life and our will over to Him. Now, why would we do that? What would motivate us to go that far? We have never done this in our lives. We have always tried to run our own lives. We have been afraid not to run our own lives. And then we get into chapter 5 and we get to the third step and we begin to understand. And it's this point in the big book where the business of unmanageability comes flooding in. Because we learn here that we've been trying to run our lives based on self-will. We've been trying to arrange everything to suit ourselves. It didn't work. Never worked. Was never satisfactory. The fact of the matter was that we wanted to blame everybody else for the failures. It was not our fault, it was their fault. We ran to psychiatrists, we ran to doctors, we ran to preachers, and why is everybody against me? Why won't anybody do what they're supposed to do? And on and on. In the meantime, we're killing ourselves with booze. The big book says, look, it's time to understand something. Let's get it straight right now. Your problems are your own making. They arise out of yourself. An alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he or she usually doesn't think so. Above everything, it tells us we have to be rid of this selfishness. We have to, or it kills us. Well, now we begin to understand what we began to see back in the first step. That we had no way to defeat alcoholism on our own because we're powerless over it. We were going to have a higher power stand between us and the booze. Now that's not going to happen with a head full of self. And so therefore, if we remain in this mode of selfishness and self-centeredness, it's going to kill us because there's no way for God to come in. There's no way for us to make a surrender when we keep insisting that we're going to play God. And the big book makes it quite clear. We have to be rid of this selfishness or it kills us, and we cannot do this ourselves, but God can and will if we seek Him. And it's at that point, this is where the third step comes in on page 62. It says we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Therefore, we decided, there's the decision of the third step. We decided that hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be the director. He would be the principal and we the agent. He the father and we the child, you see. So this is the decision of the third step. And that decision again is going to come to us because we've been doing the reading, going to meetings, we've been talking to people, and we have been praying, and we've been immersing ourselves in this so that suddenly we have to come to realize that everything I've been doing up to now didn't work. If I wish to live, I'm going to have to do whatever it takes to let God in. We find out that we must make a commitment from here on to work the rest of the steps. That from now on, whether we get the steps or we don't is going to depend upon the work we do and are willing to do. We find out that we must be willing, without reservation, to say, God, here I am, use me. I offer myself to Thee to do with me and to build with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Amen. A powerful prayer. Think of what it's saying. No reservations here. We're saying, here I am, use me in any way that you see fit. And I am making that commitment right now to be free of the things in myself that will stop you from being able to use me. And that means the things that block me off from you. That's the third step prayer. You see, it is the way we implement the decision of the third step. Now, this having been This prayer having been used and the decision having been made, we go immediately to our fourth step. The fourth step is broken down into 4 parts. The four parts are as follows. The first part is a resentment list. This means that we're going to identify everybody for whom we have a resentment. And we're going to make a list of the things which they did, which have caused us to be angry and resentful toward them. Before we pass on to the second part, we're going to be freed from our resentments. That may sound strange to you if you haven't heard it before. In the fourth step, we find the complete spiritual answer to resentments. We're going to pray for the people we resent, and we're going to ask God for the willingness to forgive the things they've done which harmed us. The second part of the fourth step is a list of our own wrongs. Now this second part of the fourth step is done without reference to the harm that was done by those we resented. We are not going to compare their fault with our fault. We are looking at resentments the same as we would look at termites in our basement. Most of them you can't see, but they're eating your house down, and one of these days you're going to fall through the floor. We cannot afford to let resentment stay because they kill us. And so the second part of the fourth step is designed for us to review our own faults. We look there at our dishonesty and our selfishness and our fear. Okay, now we have completed the cycle of our defects of character. Here is the problem that so many people have these days. Because if you read the 12 and 12, you've got all this phony baloney stuff about 7 deadly sins, for example. Please stay away from that. We don't deal with sin here. Those sins primarily refer to things that we do or did. They do not refer to defects of character. They are not descriptive of what we need to find, and furthermore, they are part of a religious practice which AA is not. There are 4 cardinal defects, all identified in the fourth step. It's very simple. Resentments, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. And the parts of the fourth step are designed for us to uncover these 4 defects of character. It is in the writing of the fourth step that we find our resentments, we find our selfishness, we find our dishonesty, and we find our fears. And we're going to find as we do that all of these defects are fear-driven. All of them. We're going to find that fear is our only enemy. That it is fear and fear alone which has warped and perverted our natural instincts. It is our natural instincts perverted by fear which we now call defects of character. What are those instincts? For sex, for security, for society. These are natural, they are God-given, they are meant for our good and the good of the race, the human race. But when they no longer function as God intended, they turn against us, and they become a species of insanity, and our minds don't work right. Now, why is it that we can't just talk ourselves out of these things? Well, you can't work on a defect which is a subliminal thing which operates below the level of conscious thought, and that's what these natural instincts are. That's why they're so deadly. We're not consciously able to control these warped defects, these warped instincts. Therefore, we must have God's help. Now, the Big Book makes it clear, if you care to read it. Our selfishness, we can't be free of ourselves, but with God's help we can. Our resentments, Big Book says we can't wish them away any more than alcohol. Our fears, we must have God's help to be freed from fear. Our dishonesty is a function of fear. We're not dishonest if we're not, unless we're afraid of the results of being honest. It's in every instance, these four defects are not amenable to our own willpower or our own self-correction. We must have God's help. That's what we're doing here in the fourth step, to find out what it is that's eating us alive, that's killing us, that's a cancer, that's ruining our lives, has caused our failures in life, and that we cannot be free of ourselves. Now you see that there's a much broader scope to powerlessness than powerlessness over alcohol, because it is also powerlessness over our thinking. It's powerlessness over over these defects, powerlessness over these warped instincts. And we have to have God's help with this. And in the fourth step, we're going to find out what all of this warping has done. What are these defects which are the result of fear? So in our second part of our fourth step, when we examine what we have done to harm others, when we examine our dishonesty and our selfishness and our fear, and we're going to write about this, these defects will just pop right out, like widescreen Technicolor stereophonic. They'll be Dolby, they'll be everything, they'll be right there, we can see them. And we can also see that we are in fact powerless over these things. And we haven't done anything to compare ourselves over here with what they did to us. We're already free of those resentments. We've had the spiritual solution. We've prayed for them. We've asked for the willingness to forgive what they did to us, and it was given to us. So now in the second part, we're going to identify the other three cardinal defects: dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. Then we move on to the third part of the fourth step, which is our fears list. In our fears list, we're going to catalog and list each and every one of our fears. And we're going to list what we believe and what we see to be the cause of those fears. What it is, what was the threat. And there are standard fears that everybody has. And our sponsor will know, and if you're sponsoring people, you need to know what those are. It's going to start right out with losing what we have. Almost everybody has that fear when they come in the door. Not getting what we want or need. Rejection, failure. These are very common. Getting old. Being found out for the things we've done to get what we have. Being punished. God's punishment. Fear of death, fear of injury, sickness, and pain. Fear of drinking and drugging again. And what we do when we write our fears list, we write all these down, and any others that we have, and we write down what we believe to be the cause, what was the threat. And now here's something which is almost, doesn't seem to be anybody who understands this, but the fourth step contains, along with the fifth step, a complete spiritual remedy for fear. First, fear that is recognized by us and written down, and then discussed with another person, and then turned over to God, equals no fear. And we'll find that this is the formula which is provided for us. In our fourth step, we're going to write down our fears and what caused them. We want to talk them over with our sponsor, and we want to ask God to remove them. And we want to ask Him to show us what He would have us be. And the Big Book tells us the truth. It says that at once we will commence to outgrow fear. That's true. And when we get to our fifth step, we will discuss these fears again with our sponsor or whoever's here in our fifth step. And what's the Big Book say? Our fears fall from us. They're gone. Now, this means the fears we came in with, and anything that we kind of generated up to this point. What did we learn? We learned that every time a fear arises, we recognize it, write it down, talk to somebody about it, and ask God to take it. why would we then wish to ever live in fear? Fear is very, very toxic. It's very dangerous to us. It's very communicable. It's very painful. It is our enemy. Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing we had to fear was fear itself. And he was right. If there is a devil, his name is fear. And yet we have a way in our big book, our manual here, to be absolutely free of fear if we wish to use the tools that we've been given. And that's found right here in the fourth step. And then finally, the fourth part of the fourth step is a sex inventory. And as most of us know by this time, sex problems, relationship problems, probably cause more trouble in recovery than anything else. Because we're such damn fools about it. And we're so willful about it. And we find somebody that we're attracted to, and we'll run around telling everybody that it must be God's will that we're together. Truth of the matter is, we don't want to find out whether this was a relationship made in heaven or not, because we're afraid it isn't. And we're afraid to ask God to tell us. But the big book says we're supposed to do that, doesn't it? It says if we have any doubts about this, in our morning meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. And then it says, and here's the rub, the right answer will come if you want it. Now, the question here is, do you want the answer, right? Because we're so bloody willful about that. And the big book recognizes that we're dealing with the most powerful of all of the three natural instincts. It calls it the imperious urge. The fourth step requires of us, is what part of the directions, that we go to God and we ask for His help to mold an ideal for our future relationship or sex life. Not the ideal person we want in our lives, but our ideal about ourselves, how we are to conduct ourselves, what should be our actions and our motives and our attitude. And we ask God for help with this, and it's a real good idea to write that down, and write it down in the form of a prayer, and we ask God to help us with that. And then the big book goes on to say a little later, if we fall short of that ideal, we very easily could drink, but not if we're sincerely sorry for what we've done and are willing to let God take us on to better things, in which case the big book says we will be forgiven. And that sets the stage for something later on in the 11th step where forgiveness again becomes an issue. Now, when we have written our fourth step into 4 parts, we have 2 more things that need to be accomplished. One is that we need to have now a list of all the people we've harmed and become willing to make amends to them right now. You say, well, wait a minute. That's the 8th step. That's true. But most of the 8th step is done in the 4th step. So now you can see that to have a 5th step, we're going to first have to have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 4 is going to need to be done right. Otherwise, when we come out of 4, we don't have all the facts. The 4th step is not designed to make us wrong or bad or indict us. It's to teach us. We do the 4th step to find out what's wrong with us that we can't fix ourselves. The 5th step is not an optional step. It is an absolutely critical step. It is utterly necessary that we work our 5th step. The big book says this, that we must be entirely honest with somebody if we are to live long and happily in this world. Now, the 5th step is designed to accomplish a number of wonderful things. And as a matter of fact, for a lot of people, the 5th step will be a very big head start on our spiritual awakening. All the way back in the 5th step. We are going to feel that we are on the broad highway, walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. We're going to feel that the drink problem is going away. Our fears will fall from us. And the 5th step is to be done withholding nothing. And there's only one sentence which defines the 5th step in the big book. You know that? It's really, the big book is so dense. And what it tells us is this. it says that we pocket our pride and go to it. We pocket our pride, put our pride aside. Remember pride, the godfather of all of our defects. Fear, the hitman that pride sends forth to kill us. We pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. That's the fifth step. The result of this is a wonderful thing, because the fifth step is a highly, highly spiritually charged step. It goes into antiquity. We can read about it in all religious writings and many philosophical writings, and in the metaphysical writings of the Eastern religions. It's everywhere, because for all time, those who thought about it, or those who have been involved in spiritual pursuits, have understood the enormous power and necessity of being honest with another person. It isn't enough for us to say, oh, well, God knows all about me, and yeah, I've admitted this stuff to myself. That's enough. I don't need to, why would I need to tell somebody else about it? We do need to do that. If we don't do the fifth step, we will drink again. That's a pretty good reason, isn't it? The fifth step is done this way. Now, this is not in the big book, and this is, I'm going to pass this along to you just as a practical lesson. We have a fourth step, and it tells us that in the big book, and therefore we're going to follow the fourth step. We're not going to read it, but we use it as a guide. We want to do that so that we do not miss anything. And we just start right out with the resentment list and go on through the list of our own wrongs and our fears and our sex inventory. And all along the way, what we're doing is we're examining what has happened as we've gone through life. We're examining our failures, examining our pains, the pains we've caused others. We're looking to see how our defects of character were constantly getting in the way, constantly causing us to act and react in ways which were destructive and damaging not only to ourselves but to others. We really begin to see how it is that our drinking, our drunkenness, our disease was perpetuated because of these defects. We see our powerlessness over them. We see that we can't get rid of them ourselves. And somewhere along the line, as we go through this process, we come to understand and admit and decide that we cannot live with these defects anymore. We want to be free of them, and we've already decided that God can restore us to sanity, and we make a decision to let God have these defects. We don't want to hold on to any part of it. And a fifth step properly done will always result in that. That is, yes indeed, I've done all of this. I left no stone unturned. I'm ready. We then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. Now then, are we now ready to let God remove from us all? Oh, that's a 3-letter word. What don't we understand about the word all? We'd like to think that there's a lot of weasel room here. You know, we can play around with this for a while. Don't really have to be ready to have God take all this stuff. There might be some stuff there we still want to hang on to. That's crazy. Are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can He take them all, every one? We're now looking at the 7th step, which is one paragraph on page 76 and is a prayer. When ready, now that word ready is the same word as used in the 6th step, isn't it? We're entirely ready to have God remove all these things which we admitted are objectionable. When ready, we say something like this: My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. Let's just sneak right back to page 63 for a second, shall we? Center paragraph, first sentence. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Page 76, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. Same prayer. Page 76, I pray that you now remove from me every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Page 63. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. May I do thy will always. You see, it's the same prayer. And remember that the difference is that when you do the seventh step and take the seventh-step prayer, you now know what's wrong with you. When you ask God to take away every single defective character which stands in the way of your usefulness to Him and your fellows, you know what you're talking about. You have identified and admitted those defects, haven't you? And so that's the difference between the two prayers, is you, where you have found and faced the things in yourself which are blocking you from God, and now you're seeking His help to be rid of them. And this fulfills the directions right after the third step. A strenuous effort to find, to face, and to be rid of the things in ourselves which are blocking us from God. See how that all ties together? When we have said this prayer from the bottom of our hearts, meaning it entirely without any reservations whatsoever, it says we have then completed step 7. That's all there is. Now there was another whole set of things which was blocking us from God. It wasn't just our defects of character and our insanities, but it was also all this guilt we were carrying around. And that's why we have to, in our fourth step, we have to find out whom we've harmed and become willing right then to set matters straight if we can. In our fifth step, we're going to admit what we have done. And in the sixth and seventh step, we're seeking relief from our defects. In the eighth and ninth steps, we're seeking relief from our guilts. Because keep in mind that our guilts block us from God just as surely as do our defects and our insanities. And so the eighth step turns out to be, by the time we get there, it's mostly already done, because we did it when we took our fourth step. It is quite clear that we cannot make an amends in our ninth step if someone else is going to be harmed. Certainly not without their permission. And this cuts really right across the board with all the amends that we need to make. An example would be, suppose that we need to make amends to a family that we have hurt deeply over a long period of years. It would be a terrible mistake to go to them and sit them down for 3 hours with a parade of the horribles, making them relive every rotten, nasty, stinking, dirty thing we ever did. That would be a terrible mistake. And so we keep it short, we keep it to the point. And we recognize that with family, we may have to be making amends for the rest of their lives, or the rest of our life. By not only by living a sober way of life, but by being the kind of person, family member, that will be an addition to the family and a strength and a spiritual guide to the family, an inspiration. in marital matters, or in matters where we have perhaps have cheated on a spouse or a loved one, there are many times when we are not permitted to make this amends, to just jump up and give the names of the other party and talk about how wonderful it was, but we're really sorry anyway and all that stuff. Usually that's very bad to do, because the big book says jealousy is the most terrible human emotion, plus the fact that that third party is very likely to catch the brunt of the anger and the jealousy, and we don't have any right to do that. There are other instances where we are forbidden to make amends. For example, where we have committed a criminal act, and we know we've never been caught, never been charged, nobody's looking for us, but we did it anyway. Now we've got a whole new family, we've got a new way of life, we've got people who count on us. We would, in order for us to be shriven of our guilt, our inclination is to want to be, the big book calls a martyr, and run in and say, here I am, incarcerate me. And that might be okay in some instances, but if we have people who are counting upon us, who need us, who will be seriously harmed by our incarceration or even prolonged time in trial, we have to go to them first and tell them frankly what happened and ask their permission before we do that. We may have to just live with it. A lot of times there are amends that we cannot make. Another thing that we remember and we make sure that we teach our sponsees is that there is no such thing as going into amends expecting or seeking forgiveness. That's not the point at all. The point of making amends is to be freed from the guilt which is blocking us from God. And therefore, our approach is not begging for forgiveness, but forthright admission of the things which we have done, and a demonstration of our how sorry we are about it, and our willingness to set matters straight if we can. And so we are not permitted to harm somebody else in our making our amends. Big Book says we clean off our side of the street, which means simply this: if I'm making amends to you and you were equally harmful to me, or maybe the scales are way tilted on your side, I'm still not permitted to bring that up. I don't criticize you. I don't excuse myself based upon what you have done. I simply talk about what I've done, express how sorry I am for it, and ask if there's something I can do to be helpful. And so there are these rules that must be followed. And that rule that we cannot do anything to harm another person is a set rule. It cuts all the way through our lives and everything that we do. There's a corollary, by the way, which most people don't understand or are not taught, that we're not permitted to allow another person to harm us. That's also a spiritual rule. Why? Because when we're being harmed, we're being blocked from God. What's the whole point of all this? Therefore, if someone is harming us, we say, stop right there. We'll have none of this. And if you can't get it stopped, you got to get away. We do not permit another person to harm us ever again. Everybody in this room at one time or another was a victim. If you stop and think about it, you'll realize that in order to get your own way, decisions based on self, rationalized for you that it was okay to be a victim, to let others get away with it, to take their abuse in order to get what you wanted, to be part of the gang, to be accepted. Some victimization is very subtle, others is very overt. But nevertheless, we have all compromised and we've settled. We're not going to do that anymore. Now it says that we're going to have to stay close to God and perform His work well. That means 10, 11, and 12. Those are the steps which we're going to use for the rest of our lives to stay close to God and perform His work well. In the process, we will continue to grow spiritually, which we must do. There's no sitting still, ever. We will become disciplined and consistent. We will do what we are supposed to do every day. We will recognize that spirituality is a daily process, not something we can put in the bank and save up for a rainy day. That our program today doesn't do a thing for us tomorrow. That every day is a day when we must surrender as we go through the day. We're going to surrender in prayer. We're going to surrender in meditation. We're going to surrender by virtue of our being willing to help others, turning our thoughts to others we can help. That's why the big book says that every day is a day when we must carry a vision of God's will for us into all our activities, and that all we have is a daily reprieve. That's it. But it's a miracle that we have that. This deadly, incurable, progressive illness has been placed in full, complete, absolute remission. And now we have the tools, the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps to keep it there, if we but use them. And this is where everybody starts to fall apart. You see, the 10th step came about because our founders realized through hard experience that they were not perfect, that the world and all of its people would continue to threaten them, that threat equals fear, and fear equals the recurrence, the reoccurrence, the reappearance of defects. So they found they had to have a way to keep up with this. And the 10th step came about as a result of that. The 10th step you'll find on page 84. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory. Now, an inventory is a written list. Teach your sponsees to carry a little notebook so that they can write this stuff down during the day. Continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. Now, the word "as" there is very important. It means that while we are making amends, we are also starting 10, 11, and 12. Because amends may go on for a long time. But we're not going to wait to finish our amends before we start working the 10th step. We've entered the world of the Spirit. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And what that means is understanding of God and effectiveness in carrying the message. Remember that in order to grow in understanding of our higher power, it's necessary for us to experience God in our lives. And we do that by taking one leap of faith after another. We let God in. Our effectiveness in carrying the message is a tremendously important thing. This is a part of our 12th step. It's part of our mission. The mission that we have to carry this message to others, and it's an integral part of our recovery and our continued sobriety. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. So, we're going to be taking inventory in the 10th step from now on, the rest of our lives, and we teach our sponsees the same thing. If they get a little funny about it, tell them sorry. That's just the way it is. Now, these next sentences are the 10th step. It's very simple. We're going to continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Page 84. Continue to watch, which means to inventory selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear when they come up during the day. And that's our 4th step. brought forward to our 10th step. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. That's our 7th step, brought forward to our 10th step. We discuss them with someone immediately. That's our 5th step, brought forward to our 10th step. And make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone. That's our 9th step, brought forward to our 10th step. Now you see how all of these things work together. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. That's our 12th step. So that's a bridge from the 10th to the 12th step. And love and tolerance of others is our code. That does not mean a state of mind, a loving or tolerant state of mind. It means loving action and tolerant action. Just as faith without works is dead, love without the action of love is nothing. Tolerance without being tolerant is nothing. It's nothing but a bunch of electrons running around in our skulls. Doesn't mean anything. Everything in our program, you teach your sponsees, has to do with what we do, what our actions are. Love without the action of love is simply a dead state of mind. If you find yourself saying, I love somebody, but you are unwilling to act toward them with love, you better look to see what your definition of the word love really is. And then it goes on to tell us that we have been restored to sanity. It tells us this has happened automatically. It tells us that the promise which we received all the way back in chapter 4, remember, where it told us that this book was written for us so that we could find a power greater than ourselves which would solve our problem. And here it tells us the problem has been solved. It does not exist for us. We no longer have the obsession and compulsion to drink alcohol, and the craziness, the insanity of that first drink is gone. And we didn't even swear off. Now here we find that we have been restored to sanity. It goes on to tell us that we have but a daily reprieve, and that this is contingent on our staying spiritually fit. How are we going to do that? We got the 10th, 11th, and 12th steps to do that with. Tells us that every day we're supposed to surrender, and the proper use of our will is to will ourselves to make surrender. Nobody takes their will back. That's another big bunch of baloney. We just don't give it. Today, we have 3 basic tools for surrender. We ask God that His will be done. We ask Him to show us what our next step is to be. We deliberately in prayers make an act of surrender. We meditate. That's surrender. And we work with others. Those are the 3 tools we've been given to stay out of self every day if we're willing to use them. The second step told us that we're going to find God deep down within ourselves. Last paragraph on page 85 tells us that's what's happened. We've commenced to sense the flow of God's Spirit into us. Now we know that God is Spirit, we are Spirit, He is of us, and we are of Him. We find Him deep down inside ourselves. We become God conscious. Now our job is to go forward from there and to keep that we've just been given as this great gift. We're going to do that by working our 11th step. Now the 11th step we find on pages 86, 87, 88. The 11th step is composed of 3 parts, not 2 parts, but 3 parts. The first part of the 11th step is a 11th step inventory, not 10 step, 11th step inventory. We find it set out in detail on page 86. We find 10 questions there which we must answer every night. And these 10 questions are designed specifically for us to find out if we've gotten off the path, if we've strayed from the chosen ideal, which is to practice these principles in all of our affairs. We look to see if we've been of maximum help to others, or whether we've been back grubbing around and taking. and making decisions based on self. We look to see if we took care of the defects as they cropped up during the day, and if we didn't do our 10th step, we're going to have to take care of it tonight. And where we have gotten off the path, where we've strayed from the path, we found out back in our 4th step that we can be forgiven for doing that. And so, as a part of our 10th step inventory, the first full paragraph on page 86, we ask God forgiveness. Nobody even knows that that's there unless you teach them. Ask God's forgiveness and ask Him to show us how to do better tomorrow. Demonstrate our willingness to improve and to do better. That's the key. So that inventory is the first part. Then we have prayer and we have meditation. Prayer and meditation go together. Meditation is not optional. It's one of the major tools of recovery. Prayer and meditation are like Siamese twins. When we pray, it's somewhat like meditation. When we meditate, it's very much like prayer. Why should we meditate? Aside from the fact that it's one of the tools, aside from the fact that it's been proven over the eons to be an extremely important spiritual practice. Think of it practically. I was just talking to somebody at the break about this. Janine here is a very dear friend. And if I went to Janine and I asked Janine a very important question, and I was hoping that I would be able to receive an answer from her that would help me. But before she could answer my question, I turn my back on her and walk away. Would she not think I was not only rude but nuts? Why in the world did I ask the question in the first place if I wasn't willing to wait for the answer? That's what we do when we meditate. We listen. If you think of meditation as listening to God, it makes it very simple. Get quiet, for God's sakes, and listen. Then let go. Relax and take it easy. Ask God for help. Tell Him you need some help. Show me what you want me to do here, God, and I'll accept whatever answer you give me. Please show me how to have enough power that I can fulfill your will and be obedient to you. And then I'll listen. I'll listen to you. Tell me what you want me to do. And we listen. If you think of meditation that way, it makes it so bloody simple. Get quiet, relax, take it easy, and listen. It's a whole lot better at this stage especially if you have newcomers you're working with. Don't get them all bollocksed up with guided meditations and the phony electronic music and some of this other stuff, crystals and candles and incense and guys in saffron robes and how to sit and how to breathe. I mean, all that stuff is probably okay. But how the hell are you going to do that if you need to meditate and you're at work and somebody's been giving you a bad time and you're all upset and you know you got to get this report done? You need God's help right now. Say a little prayer, disappear into the men's room or the ladies' room, sit quiet for 2 minutes and just let God have it. And boy, that really works. The problem with all this ashram stuff is you can't carry it around in your hip pocket or your purse. Why not learn to just go to God and be quiet and listen to Him? Because that's what He really likes. He wants you to be concentrating on Him. Now, you may belong to religion which tells you that if you pray, you'll get what you pray for, and that you ask and it shall be given you, and so on. I mean, if that's what you believe, there's nobody here is trying to tell you differently. But the Big Book tells us that in our practice, in our spiritual practice, we're asking only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. Now, stop and think about how absolutely consistent that is with your 3rd step prayer. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. An unconditional offer. Right? So now we violate that whole offer. We say, by the way, God, I'd like a I'd like a Beamer SUV because it had lots of room. I could take a lot of people to meetings. And then there's this other joker in the pack. God, I would sure enjoy having a better job, a house on the bay, 50-foot mast views, and a trophy blonde. If it be thy will.
Oh, yes, it does.
See, we always, if we prayed at all before we got here, we were telling God what to do. Now we stop doing that. Do we mean it when we say, thy will, not mine, be done? Do we mean it when we say, I offer myself to thee to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt, taking my wants out of it altogether? Do we mean it or do we not? And if we do, we will have no problem praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And that, my friends, is what really works. And then finally we have a 12-step. Did anybody ever stop to think what a spiritual awakening is? It's not defined anywhere in the big book. The term is used only once, and that's in the 12th step. Why? Because when Bill wrote the steps originally, the term was spiritual experience. And we find spiritual experience scattered all the way through the big book, don't we? The editorial committee changed spiritual experience to spiritual awakening. So what is it? Nowhere is it defined. We can identify it very clearly just from being cognizant of what's in the book. Spiritual awakening is going to bring us a degree of humility and honesty and gratitude that we never had before. It's going to bring us close to God. It means that we will become God conscious, conscious of the God within. Spiritual awakening means that we have the power, if we wish to use it, to be in concert with our higher power, that we can hear God, that we can be inspired by Him, that we've gone from that place where we were blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit to a place where we've entered the world of the Spirit. We've been restored to sanity. That's all part of the spiritual awakening. We're no longer crazy. Our minds have been restored to their original condition. It's kind of like taking a 1957 Ford Thunderbird, which is all rusty, sitting out in the back in the farmer's field covered with kudzu. That was us. You go in there with a wrecker truck and you pull that sucker out and you take it down to the bare frame and you start scraping off the rust. And if you work on it long enough and hard enough, you end up with a brand new Ford Thunderbird. Everything bright and shiny and new and runs like a top. That's us. We can do that. You have to work at it. So your job as a sponsor is to teach your sponsees the work they must do. Show them how to do it. Help them do it. And then help them to become disciplined and consistent in doing the work every day. If you're going to do that, you better be doing it too. By our works will be known. By our actions will be known. Your third step prayer, remember what you ask. You ask God to make an example of you so you could be helpful to others. An example of His power working in your life, and His love, and His way of life. And He does that for you. By the time you get to 12 steps, that prayer has been answered. Now it's up to us to stay that way. And if we get off the path, we ask God for forgiveness and ask Him to show us how to do better. And we redouble our efforts. None of us is being nominated, I don't think any of us being nominated for sainthood. I don't believe I'd want that anyway. It usually requires it to be some kind of a martyr. I don't have any desire to be a martyr. But we do get to have spiritual growth every day if we wish to, because we have all the tools to do that with. The big book tells us how to work with a newcomer, and that in our 12-step work with newcomers is all laid out in the first 7 or 8 pages of chapter 7. And that working with newcomers is the result of the trial and error and the input of Dr. Silkworth and Bill's first attempts and then his later attempts, and how he taught others, and how this evolved, and how they came to understand that they had to first establish with the newcomer their credibility, their bona fides, that they knew what they were talking about. And it's a very simple formula. First we tell them how we drank. We tell them what alcohol did to us. We tell them how we tried to stop and couldn't. So now they know that we were there before them. They know that we know what we're talking about when it comes to alcohol. Then we tell them about the disease, and we hit them over the head with a sledgehammer. We don't spare that at all. We let them know that this disease is invariably fatal, and it is incurable and progressive. And that if they do not stop drinking, they will die. But they can't stop on their own. But there's the rub. There's the dilemma. If they're still interested, then we tell them how we recovered. And we stress the spiritual freely. We don't hide God on them. We don't beat around the bush. We don't try to explain our recovery based upon our faithful attendance at outpatient therapy sessions, or our frequent use of medications, or the fact that we sit on some psychiatrist's couch 3 times a week. We don't try to explain our recovery that way. All that stuff's been around forever. If we're going to tell them how we recovered, we're going to talk about the steps, and we're going to talk about God. And that's what the big book tells us to do right there at that first meeting. No pussyfooting around. My sobriety date is December 20th, 1964. I've been sober through the grace of God since that time. I'm a very grateful alcoholic. Our our joke mavens have shown up tonight. Last week they did not grace us with their presence. They were attending some kind of a shindig over on the West Coast. I don't know what that was, but was it a state convention or something like that? Is that what it was? More important than this meeting? Shame on you, Audrey. Okay. Anyway, we have a fresh lawyer joke. Now then, as is our practice here, we know that these jokes are all groaners, so we practice our groaning first. Then we get everybody warmed up for that. You ready? Groan, groan, groan. Okay, now you're in pretty good shape. That's good voice tonight. This lawyer died and went to heaven, James. As he stood in front of St. Peter, by the way, that's kind of an interesting twist, isn't it? This lawyer going to heaven? As he stood in front of St. Peter at the pearly gates, he saw a huge wall of clocks. He asked, "What are those clocks?" St. Pete said, "Those are lie clocks. Everyone on earth has a lie clock. Every time you lie, the hands on your clock will move." "Oh," said the lawyer, "whose clock is that?" Pete says, "That's Mother Teresa's clock, and her hands have never moved." "And whose one is that?" "Oh, that's Abraham Lincoln's clock. His hands only moved twice." Then the lawyer looks at St. Pete and said, "Where are all the lawyer clocks?" He said, "Oh, God has those in his office. He uses them for ceiling fans." Groan, oh, groan, yeah. That was a pretty good joke, Janet. Yeah. Where'd you get that? Off the internet?
Somebody sent, an AA person sent it to me from Chicago.
Oh, okay.